Hello everyone, welcome to Canberra Museum and Gallery. For those of you I haven't met, my name's Shane Brainard. I'm the director of this place and the three historic homes we look after, Mugga Mugga, Calthorpe's House and Lanyon. It's fantastic you can join us for our second lunchtime lecture this week. The first was in the Lens Love Photography exhibition on Monday. It's the last week of that show, so if you haven't seen it yet, try and get through. Sunday's the last day. But this is a very exciting moment for us that has been around a year in the making. We're very fortunate to care for the Nolan collection, a collection of 141 works by renowned Australian artist Sydney Nolan. I'm sure his work is not unknown to all of you. You can have a look off screen, just around the corner in the permanent exhibition of the Foundation collection of his works, which includes some of his most iconic works and earliest Kelly paintings. And we have a special exhibition on upstairs at the moment too, of works from his Remembrances of My Youth series. These are spray can works that are seldom seen. So that's another thing to look at while you're here. We were very honoured to receive the generous support of the Australian government. We care for this collection on their behalf. We received additional funds to do that in the centenary year of around $95,000. That's based on a proposal that we put forward to create an online presence for the collection, so people will be able to enjoy all 141 works with detailed text that has been produced by Dr. Sophie McIntyre, who's also with us here today. She'll be giving a talk next Wednesday, and you can find out about that if you grab a calendar at the desk on your way out. Part of this project has been creating an online portal to the collection of these works, and you can get up very close and see the real detail of them and delve into some of Sophie's art and historical text. But we also, so to do that work, we engaged IceLab, and Michael Honey from IceLab will talk shortly about that process. IceLab is really, I think, leading an industry leader in putting some of our important national collections online. Some of you may be familiar with a partnership project that the Museum of Australian Democracy did with the National Archives of Australia to put the Mildenhall collection online. Well, IceLab was behind that project. So we engaged IceLab as an industry leader to help us with this task. We also thought it would be interesting to really pull out the stops and try and do something quite experimental, and separately formed a partnership with the University of Canberra School of Creative and Cultural Research, represented here by Mitchell Whitelaw today, who will also tell us about a very innovative alternate search mechanism. It's not a search mechanism, it's an exploration mechanism that he's been working on with a postgraduate student, Riley Post. So thanks to all of the people that have contributed to this that I've already mentioned, but also a special thanks to Michael Bailey, a member of the staff here who is the manager for partnerships and business development. He's really stepped up to help guide this project and has taken on a fair bit of the heavy lifting in-house. So thanks, Michael. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Michael to be followed by Mitchell, and then we'll have some time for some questions from people here today. Just to let people know too, this talk today is also being live streamed, and the address for that live stream, if people want to refresh on anything, will be indeed on the Nolan website, probably sometime tomorrow morning. So enjoy. Thanks, Michael.
So my name is Michael Honey. As Shane mentioned, I'm the director of a company called IceLab. We're an interactive design development studio. We have an office that way, about 300 metres in Hobart Place, and another office in Melbourne. And we do work for a whole bunch of clients, but mostly I think we work in the cultural, intellectual sector. So here are a few of the clients we work with. And in a lot of cases, we work on collections of things. Obviously, collections for places like Museum of Australian Democracy or the National Museum, collections of courses and things for places like the universities, and collections of literally hundreds of thousands of books for people like reading books. But I suppose this is now the apex of our cultural achievement is to work with see that. And it's actually great to work with someone so close. It's fantastic. And this is another collection that we're putting online. Now, what I want to talk to you about today, I suppose, well, what it actually is to put a collection online. What is it like today? And I guess what are the considerations when putting anything online? And I was thinking about this, and I suppose there are really 4 considerations you need to deal with. I'm not going to talk technically at all today, although I'll bore you with it. But I suppose the main thing is that it's, well, one of the things is that it's technically feasible. This is a necessary condition. And that circle of what is technically feasible is, as it were, getting larger all the time. What we can do now is more than what we could do 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago. And the sweet spot of what is possible is always changing. But sort of inside that is also what is budget achievable. Shane mentioned that there was some money made available by the federal government, and while it would be nice to have all that money, there's only so much that you can do with a certain sort of budget, and we have a responsibility to spend that money wisely. And sometimes that which is on the edge of what is technically achievable may not be responsible budget-wise to actually do. The latest technology is the most expensive, and it's also not necessarily the most broadly acceptable. And so you need to be able to responsibly deploy it. And by that I mean that it's no good us building something which can only be seen by people with the absolute latest browsers, with the best tech, because the purpose of this project is to provide access to the Nolan collection to the people of Australia and, I guess, to the world. And that's no good if a very high technological barrier to entry is provided. And of course, the other thing is it has to be client acceptable, and so having a good relationship with one's clients is extremely important. So what we're trying to do is get to that tiny little spot in the middle, which is something that satisfies all of those criteria. And that's, I guess, that's the challenge of working in a commercial development environment. So what is a collection? I guess a collection is an ordered series or multiple series of objects. There's some sort of collecting principle that's going on. There's various metadata which goes with it, artist and title, the provenance and all those sorts of things, and it has images, and that's the, well, on the web at least, that's the broad sort of thing you're likely to have. It may have audio instead or movies or whatever, but this is what a collection tends to be, the sort of thing we tend to deal with. Unfortunately for us, often a collection is not always structurally clean. One has hopes of beautiful collections full of information that's all there, but often that's not the case. A lot of work with any sort of thing like this is actually cleaning up the data or understanding the shape of it or dealing with the inconsistencies, because a human being can understand inconsistencies in data in a way that a computer cannot. So we have to deal with that. Collections are prone to be revised and to be extended, and so you need to be a little bit agnostic about the exact shape of the data as it is today, because it may be extended later on. Perhaps we'll do such a great job with the Nolan collection that another 200 Nolan works will suddenly appear, in which case we're going to have to think about, well, will the work that we've done be able to handle that extension? And there are things of variable sizes, which is to say not everything is neat. It's as if getting a collection of, say, 35mm slides might be one thing, but then if you've got given some posters and then also perhaps some film strips and some large prints as well, then your collecting strategy or your display strategy might be somewhat different. So you need to bear those sorts of things in mind when you're building a collection online. Now, if you're asked to ask a librarian or an archivist or a digital database engineer about the differences between collections in physical space and online, you'd get something like this list, I suspect. In the so-called real world, we have one location per object. These objects occupy a position in space, and they occupy only one position in space. There are objects from the Foundation collection in that room over there. There are objects from the room, which is my past collection, up there, and they can't be in both places simultaneously. And you can only be in one place simultaneously as well. You are one such real-world object, which means that you only have, as it were, linear access to those objects. If you want to see object A and object B and object C, you'll have to walk between them. You can't, as it were, magically teleport between them. That means there's limited search and retrieval possibilities because your ability to move between objects is necessarily slower than it might be in some other situation. You can only move at the speed that a human being can move. You've been to a massive gallery, you know what I mean. You wander around the Louvre for hours and you get tired, you see a certain number of works and you have to go home because you're worn out, because the physical world is big and you have to walk through it. Objects can generally only live in one set. However you conceive of them, like we were saying about the Foundation Collection. That is the Foundation Collection, and that's the room that the Foundation Collection is in. If you wanted to juxtapose something from Remembrance of My Past in there, it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to put something in one set and simultaneously put it into another set. And the other thing is that you're space constrained. There is pretty much no collection in the world, in the physical world, where the whole of the collection is on display. Almost everybody has back rooms full of stuff, has the problem of having to make a choice about what they show people. And so they're the constraints. And I suppose you would say that the online, those constraints kind of go away. Their objects can be anywhere. You can randomly access them. You can search them however you want and get at them. You can categorize them pretty much however you like and put them into multiple categories. Something can be a member of this category and that category, and tagged with this and be accessed that way. It's a whole bunch of different ways to explore it. And you can have, I guess, pretty much any size of collection you want. And that's something we're not really used to in the physical world. This space can fit about 50 people in, if it goes well. If suddenly 3 times as many people turned up, if 150 people turned up to this talk, we'd have a problem. It would not be possible to actually handle that in this space. If 3 times as many people turn up to an online exhibition, that's fine, we can handle that. Similarly, we have 141 objects in the collection at the moment. That's a number of objects you can handle. You could physically apprehend that many objects. What if instead of 141, there was 1,400, 14,000, 140,000? As the number of objects increases, and it can very much, it's very easy to accommodate that computationally. But how do we conceptually understand that? And that's not a problem that I have to deal with in this particular application, but it's something that Mitchell is dealing with at the moment. It's how do we deal with non-human numbers of things that we don't handle well? Is there a Dunbar's number, as it were, the number of works of art that you can have a relationship with? But all these things are, in some sense, beside the point, because what people actually come for is just to look at art. The reason that people go to art galleries is not to deal with the taxonomy and the sets and lots of things. It's to look at art. And one of the great things about doing something online is it gives us the ability to show things potentially at a very high level of detail to people who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity. People don't come to galleries to look at the metadata. They come to look at the art. They don't get sort of fascinated by an acute taxonomy. They come to look at the art. They want to see it in the many ways that it can be seen. And so I guess that's what we're trying to do. What we've built as much as possible, here's a screenshot of what you might see, is about the art as much as possible. There's very little sort of around it, as it were. We're trying to push the art to the fore. And if you wanted to look at this piece of art, Kelly Frank here, we can look at that and not try to push out of the way. They're necessary things. We need to have a logo that tells you what it is. We need to have tell you what the thing is. We need to perhaps tell you more information about it if you want to find out more about it. And of course, what you can do in a physical space is you can have an object card so big, but you can only put so much information on there, and we've got much more ability to be able to do that. So the details are available if we want them. Some of the details in a visual sense as well. One of the things that we're able to do with this project, which wasn't technically possible, remember that circle up there before, what wasn't technically possible a while ago was to provide people with really high resolution images at a responsibly deployable way. You can't just give someone an absolutely enormous image on the web and expect everyone to be able to download it. It's just not fair from a bandwidth point of view. As time has gone on, bandwidth has become better, but also techniques have become better. And in the case of what we're doing with this project, we're taking a technique from a completely different application. And that's the application of online mapping. This is another project which we're working on, which is the distribution of solar panels in Australia. You can see that the good people of Adelaide have got lots of solar power, and we in Canberra have pretty much no solar power. We're about 10 or 11% in Canberra, above 40% in some of the hills in Adelaide. And it's kind of the distribution there for power stations and stuff like that. What's interesting about this, though, is not the data, it's the fact that we're using online mapping technology, which is to say we slice up the world into a bunch of slices, that is like kind of tiles, at different resolutions, different zoom levels. And then instead of having to force someone to have a massive, massive graphic file, they can just zoom in on just the tiles that they need. And so what we do is, in an automated fashion, we take quite a large, decent-sized photograph of the artwork, and it gets automatically sliced up into essentially 512 pixel slices at different levels of zoom. And we could pretty much keep on going in as far as the capacity of the original photograph. And were we to go out and shoot this thing so we can only see the middle of this eyeball, we can do that too. And it's great because it means that you can explore aspects of the brushwork, and you can see sometimes fairly limited in the case of Nolan. There's a lot you can see, and that gives you, that's the stuff you can't see. If you were to stick your nose up against a painting out there in the foundation collection, you get that bleep, because you'll be in trouble. You can really explore what's going on with that, and that's really nice. That's one thing I'm really glad to be able to do, is to give people access to. Look, I mean, I know that the physical objects, people fetishise the physical objects, but I think rightly so. We like being in the presence of objects that we know about. It's all very well to hear about the raft of Medusa, but standing in front of the raft of Medusa is a different thing. But also, there are things that you can't do in the physical world. You can't sit there for 10 minutes in front of it with your nose a quarter centimetre away from it, because you'll get kicked out. We can apprehend the physicality in a different sort of way, and I think that's nice to have. That's one of the things we've done, which I think is quite interesting. The other thing we've done, which is interesting and perhaps only technically interesting to me, is the way that we've been able to tie all this together. From a geometry point of view, tying together things which have different aspect ratios, different shapes, square, long, rectangular, is kind of problematic. And the technique that we use is to we lay out a row of images to an approximate width based on how wide they are. And then we conform them all to a certain height and kind of lock that in as a very long, thin rectangle. Then what we do is we shrink the whole rectangle by a little bit, or enlarge it by a little bit, so as to fit into the width of the screen at the time. So no matter how big your screen is, it'll exactly fit. And we do that for each row. And that gives us a seamless tiling of all of those images. And it's one of the ways that it's possible to do things algorithmically that actually provide a really quite satisfying visual response. This is one of the slices you can go through. And I obviously encourage you to have a play with this now and later on. I thought it might be good to just tell you just a really small amount about what sort of the plumbing is that makes this thing fit together, because sometimes people want to know, well, how is this built, or what kind of things are there? And what's interesting about this project is that we don't have a monolithic collection management system squirting all that out. What we do have is that Michael Bailey and his team have used eHive, which is an online collection management system to store all the metadata, all of the curatorial information and size and provenance and title and all that sort of stuff, as well as the large big scan and a thumbnail image. And what we do is, on a nightly basis, we squirt that over to an application which we built, the Ruby on Rails application, which both stores non-collection information, so stuff about events, things about education, stuff like that, stuff that's not actually connected to the collection itself. It's hosted in the cloud in Heroku, and nightly we bring that stuff across and we do that slicing of all new information. So if we had a whole new collection, it'd take about a night, I suppose, to slice it all up into the zoom levels we want. We then store that on Amazon S3, which we live in Sydney in this particular case, all those image tiles and assets. So this doesn't sit on some server inside CMAG or something like that, it lives out in the cloud, which the asset storage lives. And then we actually make that available to anywhere in the world via what's called a content delivery network, which means that the tiles that people want to view, those images, are available at sort of the closest place in the world. In our case, it's going to be somewhere in Sydney. But if you were in, say, Stockholm, then it might be out of Berlin or something like which means that we can provide people information quite fast. And then you, which is you over there, and the browser gets sent HTML. You to go to CMA, Nolan collection, and it says, yes, certainly, here's an HTML page for you. You're going to need certain assets. Where do you get those assets from? You'll get them from this CloudFront content delivery network. And it'll send the image tiles through what's called Leaflet, which is the mapping platform. It's all JavaScript type stuff. And then other images come in that way. So that's the broad structure of the what a site like this is like in the modern era. And it has some advantages. It means that people can put curatorial information in there and not kind of affect the rest of it. It has disadvantages as well, as I was mentioning to before. Every one of these arrows is a dependency. It's a connection that can go away. And I think it was the other day that the nightly import from eHive to the Ruby on Rails app changed. Something different happened. It was a security thing, and it meant that we didn't get across what series something was in. So you put something in there, it would come through and say, are you in the foundation series? And it would say, I don't know. And that's the thing is actually problematic. And as we build our systems to be more and more modular like this, we do have more and more dependencies. We're sort of moving out of the homesteading era of the internet and now into the connected, civilized part of the internet. But that also means that there are a whole lot of things which we depend upon to make it work. And the other thing I would say, of course, is that the work that we do, and none of this is built by us, this is built by a whole bunch of people, and we're in a sense building some of those things together. Some of the techniques that have been used differently by other people before. So, for example, the use of the broad concept of using mapping as a way of doing stuff with images has been done by the Rijksmuseum, which has an excellent website with, I would say, 100 times the budget of what CMAP has. I'd like to think that we're better than 100, but if anyone wants to give us Rijksmuseum's budget, we're up for it. And the image stretching technique, for example, is used in Flickr, the photo site, which is owned by Yahoo. So there are different, you're standing on the shoulders of other people here and working together to build things better and better all the time. I suppose that was the final thing I wanted to say was that I'm the person who's standing here, but I'm definitely the tip of the iceberg. Andrew McRae, who is here in this room, Andrew Kroon, who in the state of Port and myself all worked on this project in various capacities. And you'll remember the bottom right-hand side of my circle thing, which is having something which is client acceptable. What I say is having a good relationship with clients is extremely important, and Shane and Michael have been excellent clients in this respect because we've been able to work collaboratively on building something which has been, I think, pretty effective. I think I've probably talked for long enough. So let me say thanks for that. We're going to do fun plugging and stuff like that, and then Mitchell will be on in just 1 minute.
In the recess too, I'll just let those of you who don't know, this project I've talked about that we've received funding from the Australian government for, it includes not only the web portal that Michael's worked on and the very experimental, I suppose, exploration facility that Mitchell's worked on, which you'll see shortly. But a third component, which is an outreach education program. We deliver a large number of education sort of episodes for school children, public talks, and art workshops based around the Nolan collection each year. And we wanted to extend that too into the digital environment. So we've run 2 pilots now of a stop motion animation project, and we're in the middle of creating outreach packs to go to schools that will allow students in the classroom to engage with the Kelly story and the Nolan story through creating their own stop motion animations, which we then, where they come forward, hope to post them online as well as a part of the site. There'll be an announcement probably in a few weeks' time about the launch of that program to schools, and at that time there'll be a sort of service day for teachers to come and learn about how that works and do a bit more promotion around that.
Cool. Thanks, Shane, and thank you, Michael, for that fantastic discussion, which I think, 100% philosophical agreement with. So I think a lot of the same ideas about working with data and I guess the principles of producing for the web very much in the work that we're doing as well. I'm coming from a different kind of angle, different context, which I'll really quickly introduce and then talk about the piece that we've made. I'll demo it for you, all being well, and talk about some of the challenges and insights and things that we've done with it. I'm from the University of Canberra. I lead a thing called the Digital Treasures program, which frankly is a program that we're kind of just making up as we go along. And I'll tell you what it's about. It comes out of a research kind of practice that I've been involved in for a few years, working in partnership with cultural institutions around Canberra and now around Australia as well, who have a common kind of need, and that is that as cultural collections are turned into digital collections.
This is a technical tweaking with the live streaming, we're including direct screen shots from the tool.
I'm trying to send from here to there, to the internet. Because you have it doesn't mean it's
Nothing?
it is no.
What if, how about now? Okay. Aha! That's the problem. It's the community stream.
That's right.
How about now? Maybe.
He's making a face.
I'm going to press on.
Depends with Gavin.
Yeah, press on. That's the nice. Okay, so we work with a number of different institutions and their collections. Digital collections represent an amazing challenge and an amazing opportunity because as essentially our cultural heritage is turned into digital stuff that lives on the internet, that opens up an incredible potential in the way that we encounter, interact with, use, reapply all of that material. It's an incredibly exciting time. The mission of the Digital Treasures program is to support innovation in this area and to work with the people who hold digital cultural collections and help them do fun, interesting, engaging, experimental, innovative things in that world. And we've got quite a number of people, staff and students working in this area at UC. Riley Post, who's my current PhD student, worked with me on this Nolan project. A few really quick examples. I won't actually go into these in any great detail. This is a project we did for the State Library of New South Wales. You can find it at that URL. Looks a little bit like that. In this case, we are looking at challenges around large collections. When I say large, this is a 7,000 image collection. And there's a kind of recurring question in our work that keeps coming up, which is when you have a large collection, as Michael alluded to, how do you expose it to someone in a way that makes it available for their experience in a kind of a rich way and that doesn't require them to search? So I don't know much about the history of Manly, but even if you don't know anything about the history of Manly, just from seeing that single still image, you can infer quite a lot of context and detail and kind of texture. And so we can take a very large body of digital material and expose it in a rich way that hopefully invites people to engage, invites exploration. And that's become one of our kind of signature approaches. So a project that we launched last year for the NGA and the Australian Prints and Printmaking Collection that I worked on with Ben and Butler. This is a live interface, you can go and play with this one. So this is a much larger collection, about 40,000 works. It's the entire prints collection, which is an incredibly rich collection at the NGA. And so here, this is another overview, and so it's another rich kind of interface to a very large collection. In this case, it's a sort of chronological overview, which then zooms in, shows you kind of visual samples of the chunks of that collection, as well as zooming in on a single work. One of the other principles that we work with quite a bit is this idea of kind of rich context. So seeing that beautiful print by John Bainbridge is great. Our hypothesis is that it's also useful and interesting to see it in its context. So to see it, okay, well this is a planographic print from the 1960s. What other planographic prints are there in this collection from the 60s? Which other artists were working? What's the visual texture of that work? So trying to present work in context is another theme in our work. It's another grab from another interface in the Prints and Printmaking collection. So one of our main things, one of our kind of taglines is generous interfaces, which is this kind of explorable interface where we're moving beyond search as a way to access material and trying to actually present collections in a rich way. There's all kinds of interesting challenges there. But we're also interested in a bunch of other stuff. The opportunities in this field, as I said, are really broad. So new ways of actually engaging with audience, and actually on the scholarly side, new forms of understanding that arise when you have digital cultural material that computers can do things with as well as humans. So that's a bit about digital treasures, and now I'll talk about Nolan Explorer, and I'll actually try and run it with luck. Oops. Yeah. So far so good. Hooray. Okay, so I'll just talk you through the interface, show you how it works, and then I'll talk about making it and why we made it the way we did and some of the challenges and interesting things. So the project started with discussions with Shane and Michael about this collection and what we might do. It's an interesting collection in many ways. It has an interesting provenance, interesting shape. For us, it's actually a very small collection. It's only 140 something works. And we're used to dealing with works that are in the tens of thousands. So initially it was like, piece of cake, tiny. But size is not everything, of course. And so it's kind of lovely little collection, but it's also a very diverse collection because, of course, you have the foundation collection, all of this stuff. There's also a few little odds and ends, these beautiful birds. There's these quite large collections, the Rimbaud Cézanne works, these Illuminations works. Is that Illuminations? No, that's Illuminations. Term is Natural Life, some kind of quite dark and grim drawings in there. And then these beautiful remembrances of my youth work. So it's actually quite diverse. The work comes from a lot of different periods. There's some early work, there's some late work. So it's a collection that has a distinctive shape. One of the things that emerged early on that we wanted to look at was actually connections within that collection, and that became the kind of central theme of this work. Despite the diverse qualities of the work and despite the range of time involved, there are obvious connections in here. There are connections that are specifically thematic and in terms of the content of the works. And we wanted to make an interface that would actually reveal those connections and encourage you to discover and explore the works via those connections. And perhaps starting with works that are more recognisable and familiar, you find your way to works that are less familiar. So as a way of generating those connections, we began with the same material, the same data, exactly the same data that Michael was working with in his site. We decided we wanted to actually add a layer of data over the top. And again, being such a small collection, 140 works, it becomes feasible for us to actually add that data by hand, whereas with 40,000 works, that's a bit more of an undertaking. So we essentially tagged them, and we tried to develop a sort of language, a descriptive language of tags that were very simple, quite straightforward, but that also revealed connections between the works. So the tags, the full set that you can see are actually these ones here. There's only really a handful of them. But there are a lot of interesting connections that emerge throughout the works because, as a result of those tags. So the general principle that we arrived at was actually something relatively simple, which is that, okay, we can look at the collection through these tags, so we can see flowers, for example, in the different series. And then in the little sets interface here, which is showing you the different sets, a very simple device, just a little graph, essentially, a little data visualization, which is just showing you the occurrence of that tag in that series. So you can see that there's quite a few works in the Rimbaud Cézanne series with flowers. There's only a couple in Term is Natural Life, and there's a few in Foundation. So the distribution of that idea or of that theme through the series is immediately apparent, both through these works, through the series of works that you can see there, and through the little visualization on the side here. You can also see which things occur with each other. So there's only one work that has both flowers and convicts, and it's that one. So you can discover sort of juxtapositions of ideas. You can also discover, this is a sort of This is a conventional interface in the sense that it's a top-level device. It's navigation, if you like. It sits over here. The other principle that we were interested in exploring was, so I would call this an overview, as in the other overviews that I introduced earlier. I'm interested too in almost the reverse of overview, and it's something that I'm kind of just for myself calling interview. I don't know if that's a very good kind of word or not, but really it's actually the way that you can use an item as an exemplar or as a kind of single point of entry, and through that point of entry you can then branch out into the rest of the collection. So if I find a work that I'm interested in, I can actually use that work as the point of selection. So I suddenly realise, yeah, there's quite a lot of skies. So I can select a tag via a work and then reveal other works and discover more tags and so on. City tags. So yeah, the principle, those kind of principles, which now that I kind of articulate them, seem incredibly straightforward. Took us a fair bit of kind of munging and experimenting and sketching to get to that point. The other principle, the other kind of thought that we have here is very similar to the design of the printed printmaking site, which is this idea of kind of multi-level context. So 3 seems to be the magic number here. It seems to almost always work. So in this case, we can see a close view of a single work, and then in this column here we get its sort of the next layer up, the next layer of context. So in this case, we're looking at works with the tag skeleton. And then the nav over on the left here actually provides that broad level context. So we get to understand how that set relates a little bit to the rest of the collection. And that seems to be a useful way of gleaning greater context around specific works. So they're the kind of key things that we were trying to achieve here. It's been an interesting process for us because it's been, on one hand, technically relatively straightforward because the collection is of such a modest size, but it's actually really focused our inquiry on specific kinds of interface and on, I guess, trying to make our interfaces as clean and stripped down as possible. A nice example of that is one that actually my student collaborator Riley developed, which is in viewing this whole mosaic of the entire collection, you can see the demarcation of the series, and you can see them because of these coloured borders. Now, prior to that, we were thinking a bit more conventionally, and we were using labels, and the labels were sitting there in amongst the mosaic. The labels were causing all kinds of problems. They were kind of taking up too much space and being generally kind of unwieldy. So making the labels just go away, replacing them with colour, and leaving the labels in the navigation here was actually a really elegant solution. So a way of taking information away from the display, or rather using it more elegantly, in order to let the visual qualities of the work come out a little bit more. So yeah, as I said, it's an experiment which has been a pleasure to work with CMAG in developing it. And as an experiment, I'm really keen to gather feedback on it. We might try and work out some processes through which we can get responses from users and yeah, see how it works. Okay, so that's enough from me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mitchell. I think maybe to facilitate the discussion, this might drive our live stream system off the rails. I don't know. But I was thinking it might be good to maybe bring some chairs out here, and then if we have a question, you can both have the chance to respond. One little facet of this I like to is when you do select the individual works, there's the option to revert through to the very detailed information that we have in the search that IceLab has developed. So there's a compress, if you like, between these two different ways of exploring the collection. One perhaps a much more visual, intuitive way, and one that that takes its cue. It's also visual and intuitive, but it has the added advanced search that I think we're all used to, looking at collections and library collections via these days. But it creates a lamination between those things, which I think is really useful. So are there any questions people have?
I wonder if you can talk about intellectual property, and were there any constraints or considerations that you had to manage in the project? For example, if you're doing high resolution images, are people reproducing those, or is it Creative Commons where they're allowed to? If you could just talk about that.
Sure. On the actual state of the images, I don't know. I presume the Commonwealth of Australia, the Nolan family, probably owns the copyright to the images. The fact is that if you can display it on screen, you can copy it, you can take it away. So it would be absolutely technically possible to go to, for example, one of those images, zoom in on them, screenshot the screen, go to the next part, screenshot it, and so on. And that is inevitable. If you can see it, you can take it. So I think there's not much point in really trying to deny that fact, that this could be a fact you're going to do. I think this is where what is the client's appetite for this comes in, is that that's really a policy question rather than a technical question. Certainly it's technically possible to do these things. It's also, I mean, you can make it easier or harder, I suppose. One of the nice things about the mapping interface is that those images are not easily grabbable. If you had the technical know-how, then you can go into the, you can go inspect elements and say that it finds out, and it's just some long string or something like that. There's no, Kelly.jpg. So it's not as easy to pinches of it, but we shouldn't kid ourselves. It's just like if you get a DVD. Yes, it's hard, but not very hard to copy. So I suppose that's the painful part of the saying. I guess I'm a copyright minimalist when it comes to IP for cultural things, because culture is like, I guess, like money. Culture works when you get to transact it, right? And so holding it in there helps no one except for someone trying to extract money from that. I know, for example, that the National Gallery has some of its stuff available and some of it not available online for exactly that reason, because they don't have rights to it. And it's a problem that we have particularly with museum collections. That's why it's kind of nice to deal with stuff which is potentially old and no one owns anymore. But it's definitely a problem with contemporary collections, and dealing with rights is often an expensive and painful issue. Particularly with stuff which someone thinks they can make money out of now. That's really hard.
I suppose from the CMAC point of view, of course, in the deed of gift of those items, there is a conveyance of copyright to the Australian government, and we, of course, manage it on the Australian government's behalf. Looking at this in the broader landscape, we've taken the view that there is legislation around IP and copyright that protects the owner of that copyright. So if someone is going to go crazy with these images and put them on bags and sell them for a lot of money, there is, through the Australian legal system and many legal systems overseas, the ability to act in that space, rather than necessarily, erode people's experience of the work by having a whole lot of warnings and pop-ups and kind of protections. We took the view that, well, that exists in the landscape, outside of the web, if you like, so we'll sort of rely on that.
Following from that point, is there much in the way of any integrated sharing ability with the
No, the site really doesn't. I mean, you couldn't embed this particular bit of image or something like that. It's not built to do that.
Yeah, it's not something that we've pursued through the development of this site, but certainly in the selection of eHive as the kind of online core database, if you like, that this site, or both of these sites, if you like, draw on. We know there's capacity to do it through there to sort of facilitate Trove communicating, I think, with eHive very quickly, I get. But it's certainly something we've kept open, so it may be an option that this collection is available through that source rather than a source specific.
It's certainly something we've done before in other contexts. So we've provided APIs to things. So, for example, the Company Love Tokens Interactive we've got for the National Museum has, I mean, there's humans who look at it and machines can look at it as well. And there's a documented API for it. But yeah, IP issues actually they're relevant when it comes to that sort of thing. And part of what the NMA wanted to do was to make it possible for them to revoke access to it, for example, if they found it was being abused, or that it was being hammered too hard, because that can be an issue as well. If you've got computers eating your bandwidth, as it were, there's none left for the human beings. So, yeah, I think where it's feasible, it's really nice to provide a documented machine-readable access to stuff. If you can navigate the kind of the policy and access considerations of that. I know you would like it because you could just then point all the stuff.
Yeah. In terms of sharing or making the collection shareable sort of socially, one of the other things that we were trying to do with the interface overall was make sure that every kind of state of the interface had a URL that was clean and nice and that you could share. So if you find a selection of tags that makes a set that's interesting, you can send that URL to someone and it'll work for them. And in the same way, I forgot to mention that the fact that we're linking to the main work URL on the collection side, because that is the sort of canonical URL of these works. That's their home on the internet, and to link to that is extremely important. And that becomes the basis for making them shareable in all kinds of other ways. So yeah, we're trying to adopt the kind of web practices of giving everything a URL and making it easily spreadable.
Any other questions?
I just wonder what the time frame was.
Well, you said we started first talking a year ago, so that doesn't mean that it takes a year to build. It's more dependent on there's back and forth and when deciding to do it and then starting and doing it and stuff like that. I mean, I suppose there would be, if you were to stand up and say, let's do this now, it'd take you 2 or 3 months, I suppose, to build something like this.
I think apart from balancing workload, in here anyway, we balance the workload purposefully, because I think the sort of generative time that you have where ideas are put before you and you sort of sit with them and talk about them, play with them for a while is really important in a project like this, because we did want to do something that tried to do things in a new way. And we kind of knew broadly where we were heading, but we knew that there'd be the opportunity to tailor it as it developed in conversations with the education team who works with these works in a very particular way. And with our curator here, have all been an important kind of contribution. So I'd strongly suggest factoring in time to sleep on it.
Yeah, and that's been one of the pleasures of doing it. So for our end, we started work on it in around October, I think, last year. It was really nice to, and we were working on a number of other projects at the same time. So not working on it full time by any means, and having that time for things to kind of settle and have a good think about things has actually been really productive.
In the case of that project too, the eHive aspect of it was something which was, when at the start of the project, really wasn't in place. It's like, yes, we are going to use eHive, but we don't have a collection up in eHive yet. We haven't worked out how we're going to structure stuff. And particularly with a newer technology, finding the sweet spot about the way to use it. What's the best way to represent sets of things? How is the remembrance of my past thinking? What does that consist of in eHive? How do we get it down? What's the most effective way of it? And working with those developers as well. Making that little arrow work is sometimes.
Yes.
And was there a lot of time working with the collection for the handover to the eHive stage? Was there a lot of cleaning up of your data, and how well did Berlin perform in supplying the content?
Essentially, we exported. I'm just trying to think back to this. We had all of the information stored in a database. I don't actually think we had this one on Learn. We were dealing with it separately. So there was a kind of missed step there. So we were able to clean that up fairly straightforwardly. One of the interesting things was working on text. This has been a really important part of contextualising these works. And although we have a series of catalogues to the works, text wasn't written for each specific work, and the way you might encounter it through a search like this, so you might encounter it out of the series context, it's indeed out of the knowledge of the whole Nolan collection. So working with Sophie McIntyre, who indeed will be speaking on this next week, was, I guess, not so much cleaning up, but actually developing custom text to allow people a clean encounter with the work. Again, I think the fact that it is only 141 works meant that a lot of that cleaning up could be done manually, and Michael Bailey worked directly on kind of each record to do that, which has been a good process for us as well. It's an issue, I suppose, for museums with much larger collections about identifying a point where they might put stuff publicly online, and there seem to be a few schools of thought around this. How clean does your data have to be? How full do your fields need to be? How much can you rely on kind of a crowd approach to improving that data once you are online? I know the British Museum has, I don't know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records, and when you plunge in, some of them are very scanty. But you can identify things that where there is more information and it's been filtered, and then they actively seek input from people who are crawling around in the collection to populate those fields. So I think here we were lucky it was pretty clean, but the things that did need to be cleaned up could be done manually without too much work because it was a small collection. If that answers. Anyone else? Well, thanks again to our guests today, Mitchell Whitelaw from the University of Canberra Centre for Creative and Cultural Research, and Michael Honey from Iceland. We hope to work with them again in the future. This, to use an Iceland metaphor, this is really the tip of the iceberg for us. There is a CMAG and a historic places collection that we're responsible for, so we really enjoyed dipping our toe in the waters here and thinking about what potential there is to bring that collection to more people in our regional community and indeed globally. And thank you all very much for coming today. Thanks.